Hey there, true believers. Welcome back for another episode of Monstrous The Podcast. And we've got Mr. Ryan Paul Tremblay. I can't even get your name right today. You're lucky I got my name right. So we got Ryan Paul Tremblay back today, and we're going to talk about Wendigos and some of the other stuff that may be linked in with the whole Wendigo story. So, Ryan, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing really well, man. I was busy last night and did a show with Paranormal Odyssey. That was a lot of fun. So stop by and check that out. That was an excellent show, dude. Those hosts are amazing.
Fantastic. So what kind of things did you guys talk about on there?
Oh, good grief. We covered the Raven Mocker. We covered Cherokee Little People. We covered the Cherokee Bigfoot. Talked about Wendigo and Skinwalkers and the difference between the two. We talked about the Bigfoot Dogman War. We talked about my Dogman encounter. We were just all over the grid with that show, man.
Fantastic. So we're talking about Wendigo, somebody's absolutely favorite subject matter. So let's refamiliarize everybody with Wendigo. So what is a Wendigo?
Okay, so the Wendigo is an Algonquin Cree Ojibwe belief. It's a entity. I don't want to say demonic entity, but I'll say entity that can possess a human being or a group of people after they've broken certain cultural taboos. The most popular is, of course, cannibalism. That's how everybody knows the Wendigo. But people can become a Wendigo through a curse, or even through nightmares. If they see the Pawaganok, which are dream representatives in the Ojibwe belief, then they can actually be influenced by the Wendigo and thereby become a Wendigo. So it's not really something you want to tamper with, and it's not something you want to talk about too openly, too often. And I know I should take that advice, but it's a fascinating topic, though.
So correct me if I'm wrong. So Wendigo is kind of a twofold thing. They see Wendigo as kind of this malevolent spirit of the winter that resides in the north and can move down and can kind of, for the lack of better terminology, possess someone.
Right. Correct.
Turning that person into essentially another form of the Wendigo.
Yeah. I always say that there's two different forms of the Wendigo. Okay. You got the Wendigo, the primary spirit that's in the wilderness, that's haunting the woods during the winter. Then you have a Wendigo. That's when somebody gets chosen as the vessel for the Wendigo spirit. So you're right. There is a twofold kind of thing.
Okay. All right. So what is probably the most famous case of the Wendigo if somebody wanted to look that up?
Oh, that one's easy. Swift Runner. Okay. In 1888, 1887, 1888, 1889, back in Fort Saskatchewan in Canada, a Cree fur trader went with his family to the hunting cabin that he's been to many times. Okay. And the route that he followed was his typical route. He's done this, time and time again his whole life. And for some reason, one day he decided, I'm going to murder and cannibalize my family. And when he returned to Fort Saskatchewan, he was telling the story of how his family and he were starving. There was no food. There was nothing that they could eat. And all the people around him, they noticed that he actually looked heavier. He looked stockier. He looked healthy. And so they started to wonder, well, if you were starving, you don't look any less leaner. What's going on here? And of course, they gave him alcohol. Okay. Back in those days, when you want to know the truth, you didn't just interrogate somebody under a hot light. You gave them alcohol because truth slips out. And as he started drinking, he started talking about how he actually murdered each family member. And he told them in great detail of how he cracked their skulls open to get to their brains. He broke open their femurs to suck out the marrow, how he boiled his infant son to, get his fat. And when they went back to this hunting cabin, sure enough, they found a really grisly murder site. There was dried blood and there was fat smeared on the trees and the walls. There was bones everywhere. There was a cracked open skeletons laying on the floor. And without any remorse or any regret, Swift Runner would kneel down, stick his two fingers between the eye sockets and pick up a skull and be like, well, this was my wife. And he'd toss it aside and he'd pick up another one and say, this was my child. Just throw it aside. So he was possessed by the Wendigo. He and his people firmly believed it. So much they believe this, that after he was hung in the gallows, they don't know if they buried his body or if his people took the body and quartered it. That's a mystery that to this day, nobody knows the answer to.
Okay, so what would a Wendigo typically really look like?
Oh, God, they're grotesque little things. They're very pale. They look emaciated. So they're, really skinny. They don't really have a lot of hair on their body. For some reason, when someone gets possessed by the Wendigo, the hair falls out. and they get really lanky, and they chew on their own lips to the point where their lips are gone. It's pretty much the bones underneath the lips that you're seeing. They'll chew on their fingertips, so they have no fingertips at all, no fingernails or anything. And they have really, really white skin. They're chalk white, and they're just hideous. And they smell like death and decay. And the hungrier they are, they just keep eating people. So the more they eat, the bigger they get.
So in a lot of ways, kind of what we would think of a Hollywood zombie kind of looking like.
Yeah.
Somewhat, you know.
Well, if anybody's ever played the video game Until Dawn, that is the best. That is literally the best representation of a Wendigo ever. That movie Antlers almost did it correctly. Almost. They had the dad looking really good there for a minute, but then he turned into that antlered beast, and I was kind of going, wait a minute. Why did you do this? Why? You had the right thing. Why'd you do this? But Until Dawn is the best way. That's the best way to know what a Wendigo looks like.
Yeah, a lot of video games and Hollywood are really good at taking folklore characters and trying to juice them up and change them around to make them more interesting. Like, I think it's, I can't think of the name of the game, but I was watching a thing today. They were talking about the Spriggan. Mm-hmm. And the Spriggan is usually represented in games as this thing, kind of looks like Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy, but that's not what a Spriggan actually looked like in folklore. They were little, short, fuzzy, big-eared, goblin-looking like things.
Okay.
So anyway, they were kind of like a Spriggan was more like a house spirit, or I think part of the folklore, if I'm remembering right, it was earlier today, and I was probably half asleep when I was watching. But I'm pretty sure that the Spriggan was supposed to be the spirit of giants who had died at one time and then had come back as this other smaller thing, but they had the strength still yet of giants. So it was pretty interesting. I'll have to go back and watch it again.
How do you spell that? Because I'm gonna have to look into that for sure.
Spriggan. It's a Spriggin, I believe.
Okay, I'm definitely gonna look into that one. That sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, it was really, really interesting. But back on to the Wendigo. So we have something, actually we've had a couple of things that have popped up in our culture that we talk about that remind us a lot of the Wendigo. One of them is one that is definitely a creepypasta, which is the Rake, which so many people unfortunately think is real and isn't real. That's like thinking that Pennywise is real. Pennywise is not real. And then the other one is the Pale Crawler.
Yes.
So, and the Pale Crawler is debatable. We're not really good as far as evidence on that, but we have had a lot more sightings of it as opposed to some of the other stuff. So explain the Pale Crawler and possible relation to the Wendigo. We can get into that.
Okay, so I mean, when you look at the Pale Crawlers and just the description alone, they're usually depicted as bald, very lanky. They get the deep sunken black eyes. Sometimes they have the really sharp teeth. Sometimes they have the more human teeth. People say that they're agile as can be. Like, they'll just be there 1 minute and then poof, gone the next. People have seen them climbing up walls. Some people have seen them just dangling from cliff tops. So when you look at the depiction of those and you kind of put it next to how the Algonquin, the Crete, and the Ojibwe describe the Wendigo, you see there's a lot of similarities there. Okay, I'm not saying everything lines up perfectly, but let's look at both of them at the same time. They're bald, right? Pale skin, deep sunken eyes, sometimes the yellow eyes, which the Wendigo is said to have, sometimes the deep yellow, nasty, just sickly eyes, the long limbs, and they're just terribly emaciated. So when you look at those two, you have to stop and wonder, well, wait a minute, are Wendigo and Pale Crawlers separate? Or is there a chance that maybe, just maybe, that tribes were encountering these Pale Crawlers in the wild? And because they look so human-like and they were so aggressive when they encountered these tribes, maybe the tribes were like, oh, this is someone that was possessed by the Wendigo.
That's highly possible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not dismissing any of the indigenous lore. Anybody who knows me knows I'm deathly devoted to indigenous lore, and I will defend it to the hilt. So I'm going to put that out there so nobody gets mad at me.
Right. Well, I mean, so that could be kind of similar to the lore behind when we look at Sasquatch, and then we look at some of the other tribal derivations
Yeah,
the Sasquatch idea. You know, yeah, without taking away credit where credit is due as far as the lore goes and everything like that.
Well, a quick side note too is in Maine, the Micmac actually do have a name for Bigfoot where they call it the Wendigo, but the spelling is different. It's Windigo. You know, so there you go. I mean, that makes you wonder why they would call Bigfoot a Wendigo. You know, maybe because they saw this particular Bigfoot eating people, and because it was a cannibal or ate man, maybe it just became like a blanket term. You know, anything that ate another human being, they're like, oh, well, it's Wendigo.
I think you're on the right track because there was a episode of one of the shows that Hammerson Peters had. Anyway, that I was watching, and he was talking about the term Wendigo.
Right.
And I think that was seen or interpreted as a blanket term from cannibalism.
Yeah, I think so.
So if you're encountering something else that is humanoid, you know, you're going to assume that it's a different tribe. So, sure. I mean, you know, what else is it? You know, because we don't have the reference of, in North America, we don't have the reference of monkeys if you're out there in a tribal situation.
Correct.
So you're going to see it as another tribe. So Sasquatch is another tribe, and then these Wendigo things, or these pale crawlers, or whatever you want to call them, would be another tribe. So anything that eats humans is going to be a cannibal. Because it looks like that. So yeah, that would fall under the Wendigo, definitely.
Yeah. So something interesting about the pale crawlers, though, is this is actually an indigenous belief as well. And I'm actually really surprised a lot of people skip this over when talking about the pale crawlers. So some of the tribes call them the Go-Gout, okay? Translated, that means the people before the people. And according to their traditions, what happened is these were a tribe of people, okay? They were here before certain other tribes arrived. But for some reason, they just got sick of humanity. Like they just got really bored with it and got tired of it and decided to live more animalistic nature. So they took to the caves. They took to all these other places that were subterranean. And according to these stories, this is where they lost their skin color. All the pigment in their skin was gone. They became chalk white. Their eyes became either black or white or yellow. And they just had no semblance of behaving like a civilized human anymore. And so this is where they talk about the pale crawlers. They don't talk about them as just like, you know, a passing thing. They talk about them like they were here before other people were. So, I mean, if that's the case too, then maybe they saw them, you know, feasting on other people. Maybe they're eating their own kind. I mean, we don't know. We weren't there, so we really don't know.
Right. There's a lot of stories from up around the Nahannivalley that talk about a lot of caves and the cliffs and a lot of, you know, possibilities. I think there's even a couple of stories of seeing some white figures moving around up in there that they call white devils. Now there's kind of a mixture of that story there where the white devil is referred to as the Wahila, and then there's another where the white devil is referred to as these humanoid things too. So it's kind of hard to clarify what was going on that. I tried to go back and really clarify it, and there wasn't much to be able to discern between the two.
I'm not surprised. You know, when it comes to the indigenous lore, it's really hard to prove or disprove anything. You know, and I know a lot of people are saying, oh, well, folklore isn't the most reliable way of researching. But in a way, it can be, though, because when you talk to the right people, they can point you in the right direction where, you know, you can't disprove it, but in a way, you can prove it to be true. You know, like Bigfoot started out as a indigenous thing. Okay, a lot of people will say, oh, Patterson Gimlin, that's why Bigfoot became famous. Well, no, not really. I mean, that's what kind of brought it to public view. But a lot of the tribes were talking about Bigfoot long before we were even here. Every tribe has a name for Bigfoot, you know, so they knew about it before we were even here, before we even started talking about it. All the tribes were sitting back going, yeah, there's something out there, and we know what they are.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, you know, folklore is every bit as reliable, if not more reliable in some ways, than eyewitness accounts, because an eyewitness account is a singular account. Folklore is built up over many accounts.
Correct.
And told over and over. So yeah. I mean, I you know me, I'm a folklore guy too, so I definitely love folklore.
Absolutely. You know, what's really interesting too is you can kind of trace back the beginning of the Wendigo, and it got variations, but they talk about a warrior who was out in the forest, and he was, he fell upon desperate times. He was by himself, and there was no food to be found. So he made a pact with the devil. Now that's the part that I kind of cringe at, because for a tribe to say he made a pact with the devil, well, was it the devil or was it something else? Because those tribes don't refer to Satan as the devil.
Right.
They always have a different name for it. So when somebody says, yeah, he made a pact with the devil and became the first Wendigo, I mean, maybe there's some kind of clue as to what the first story was, but I think that was kind of, whited out a bit, for the lack of a better term.
Yeah, what people fail to realize is that when you get into like the Native American cultures, is kind of with the, the old Chinese and Asian cultures and stuff. Whenever you're talking about a devil or a demon, it's not the same as a devil or a demon like what we talk about in Christianity and stuff like that. You're really close to talking about something that's more in the world or realm of like a demigod or fae or something like that. It's almost its whole separate thing. It's very hard to interpret the two between.
Right. Well, I mean, like if you look at the Bigfoot name Skookum, okay? Skookum, when translated to English, actually means mountain devil. So are they saying that Bigfoot was the devil? Well, no, they're not saying that. What they were saying is it's a mountain devil because it doesn't behave very nicely. So,
right.
Yep.
Right. So it's interesting whenever we look at culture, you have the movie Descent, and they brought up as a matter of fact, they're called crawlers in there, and they got it pretty close to what you would think that those things are like. Now, as far as I'm aware, there are no actual recorded evidentiary attacks by one of these pale crawlers on humans that I know of. But I would think it would be pretty savage if it ever did happen.
I would think so. I think if they found you in the right spot and you just didn't know it was there, I think it would definitely take advantage, and it'd be kind of like an animal attacking you more than a human.
Yeah, I would think so.
A lot of trouble. Yeah.
How I know we're on the Wendigo thing, but how much do you think that the pale crawler might have to do with old stories of like goblins and things like that?
Oh, I think they're all connected, man. I think when we look at trolls and goblins and ogres, I think that was just a retelling and a translation of Bigfoot, pale crawlers, things along those lines. I think they just didn't know what to call them. So they created the names trolls, ogres, goblins, things like that, because they were horrific looking. They were terrifying for these people, and they just didn't know what to call them, so they made up those names. I think it's all the same thing. I really do.
Yeah, with you talking about, how they were once a tribe or people that decided to go into cave. That kind of makes you think of Gollum whenever Gollum, snuck off in the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings to that cave. Yeah. Yeah. And he started to change and everything over time. That can actually, I can see that happening to a degree.
So funny you brought that up, because when Duke stole my cheeseburger earlier, I called him a stupid fat hobbitses.
I hate hobbitses.
Fat hobbitses.
All right, so what else we got going on Wendigos? And
okay, so look at the area too, though, where a lot of pale crawlers are seen. It's real. The cold weather is prevalent, so a lot of them come from the Canadian area. You get a lot of reports from there, and that's where the Wendigo legend was born. So again, that intersects. That definitely creates some kind of connection there, and I think we got to look more into this and really see: is this where the Wendigo began? Is this why the Wendigo exists?
That's true. I wonder really if there's anybody out there, any researchers out there that are really serious on the pale crawler. I'd like to run into one and really have a good conversation with them. And as far as tracking,
my buddy Nate Brislin wrote a book on the pale crawlers.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Cause I'd really like to sit down and talk with one of them about, the areas and tracking the areas and where it's primarily taking place, and how far south does it go and all that.
Well, we get those stories of feral people too. I mean, again, is that somehow tied to the Wendigo? Because you got feral people, which they say they're humans, but are they really? I mean, do they just look human-like, and it's enough where we think, oh, it's another human being? Or is this a pale crawler? That would also tie into the Wendigo belief, though, because they're attacking other people. So if they look human and they were human at one time and they're eating these hikers or campers or whatever, by definition, that's a cannibal right there. So it could be another tie to the Wendigo mythology. I mean, it's something that we really do need to delve into. I think it's something that would be an excellent answer, and it might solve two mysteries at one time. You know, you never know. It's a shot in the dark, I know, but it's a shot worth taking. For me, it is anyway.
Well, you're going to have to hook me up with your buddy so I can have a talk with him.
Absolutely. He's my Godzilla buddy, too. We love Godzilla, and so we're always talking about that stuff every day.
Gojira.
Oh, you got the legendary version, huh?
Yes.
I'm gonna show you one that I made. Hold up. I'll show you one that I made. This was a kit that I made. This is the Godzilla 64.
Oh, nice.
Godzilla versus Mothra.
Yep.
So one of my favorite versions. He's a big boy, though.
Very nice.
You know me and Godzilla.
I'm definitely an OG Godzilla fan. Whenever I was a kid, my dad was in the army. We were stationed in Okinawa, Japan for a little bit whenever I was a kid. Now, you're talking about way back in 71 through 73, I think it was. We were in Okinawa, Japan. So I grew up on Godzilla and, the Shogun Warriors and, Gamera. And we had one, it was called, I guess they called it Ultraman over here. Over there, it was called Kotama.
Yep.
But, grew up on all of that stuff. So, yeah.
Nice.
OG fan on that.
Every time someone mentions Gamera, I think of that Mystery Science Theater 3000. Gamera is really neat. He is filled with turtle meat.
Yeah. Again, I love that too.
But I mean, with the Wendigo, though, I think a lot of cultures have seen them. Okay. And I think that's also where some of the mistranslations of the Wendigo came from, because you have the Celtic belief in Herne the Hunter, and that's where you see a human-like figure where he's wearing a deer head, and he's got the antlers and all that. And then you got the Nordics who have a lot of, deer-headed entities and all these different places. But a lot of people nowadays think, oh, the Wendigo has a deer head. And it never was depicted as a stag-headed creature, not ever. So I think a lot of these confusions are coming from seeing pale crawlers wearing animal pelts as camouflage, if you will.
That's possible. That's definitely possible. I think a lot of it with Herne the Hunter over in the Celtic, and you get into Woden, and different stuff like that, where antlers and horns signified power. So they wanted, and the male power and machoism and everything. So and then in the Christian version of it, and then in the Christian version of it, anytime you put horns or antlers on something, it then becomes demonic. So it kind of satisfies two or three different archetypes all at once. So I honestly think a lot of it was Hollywood trying to make it more flashy. It's going to be this big skull, deer skull thing with the antlers, and it's more terrifying, and it's it's death and all that. There actually is a creature in folklore that is composed of basically debris that is found in the forest.
Right. Are you talking about the Leshy?
Yes. The Leshy is one of them. There actually is one more, and the name has escaped me. As soon as I brought it up, the name slipped out of my mind. But the Leshy is one of them for sure. But yeah, there is another one, and is basically composed out of debris that is out in the forest. But I mean, that's not the only ones. We also see, the stick Indians.
Yes,
were ones who would take debris and they would use that and they would put it all over their body and hide themselves in the forest.
Well, a lot of the mistranslation and misinterpretation also stems from Algernon Blackwood. When he wrote his book, he drew pictures, because back in the day they had to draw pictures. They didn't have prints and fax machines and things to use like that. So he drew a giant with branches on its head. A lot of people thought he meant that those were deer antlers. But that's not what he meant. He meant that they were branches, that it was using the debris from the forest to, to camouflage itself. So
right.
Where that was born. A lot of pop culture came in and just kind of disoriented the whole Wendigo mythology and made it what they wanted it to be. You see all these pictures of a big, tall, deer-like thing with fur and long arms and a long tail. And everybody's like, oh, it's a Wendigo. And I'm sitting there going, no, it's not. No, it's not a Wendigo. Not even close.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of a shame how screwed up that's all gotten and how misinformed a lot of people have gotten over all of this.
Well, I mean, it kind of worries me in a way, though, Robert, because, I'm very much into the indigenous beliefs. And anything like Wendigo or skinwalkers or Ravenmocker, anything that's of negative energy, the indigenous people will tell you don't pay it credit, don't revere it. And I see a lot of people going out and they're making plush dolls of the Wendigo and they're making paintings of the Wendigo, sculptures of the Wendigo. And I'm going, guys, don't revere this thing, because it's an evil spirit, okay? And who's to say that just because you're Caucasian or whatever, you're free of its taint, you're free of its curse? So I get worried when I see people doing that. I don't think they should revere anything like Wendigo or skinwalkers or anything along those lines.
Yeah, I agree completely. Unfortunately, people make a lot of money off of those things, and we have a lot of people who collect stuff like that. So
sure, but when you're paying it homage, though, since it's an evil entity, it's always looking for that attention. So when you pay it homage, it's aware that you're giving it that attention, and so in return, it might give you its attention. It's an attention that you don't want.
Oh, I agree. I agree completely. I'm just, human nature is what human nature is.
Yeah, I suppose. I think we just got to work on changing that, though.
That would be nice. I think we've been working on that for a while, though.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so Wendigo being this entity from the north, and then we're looking at the pale crawlers, who generally are coming from the cave systems up north. Are they primarily in the caves? Are they strictly nocturnal? What are we looking at with what do we know about the pale crawlers?
From what I've seen, what I've spoken to people, I've talked to some people that have had eyewitness accounts that they've seen them firsthand. They see them at nighttime. Like, they don't ever see them during the day. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because they live in caves that the sun is just too bright for them. Maybe it damages their eyes. But most reports that I get are nighttime. So I do think they're a nocturnal creature, and because they've spent so much time in caves and underground dwellings, they just can't be out in the day.
Kind of makes me think of the stories of the moon-eyed people, but that's their description is completely different. The moon-eyed people, of course, were very small, diminutive, kind of more like what you would think about as Lord of the Rings type dwarf.
Yes,
small and bearded, and the whole 9 yards. But yeah, definitely they had an aversion to light, and that also makes me think of vampires, because if you look at, the Nosferatu or the Strigoi or something like that, then you're getting into, you're really paralleling the description of the pale crawlers at that point.
Yeah, you definitely are. And, maybe the pale crawlers is kind of like what kickstarted some of these other beliefs too. If you were somebody in Europe and you saw one of these pale crawlers, you didn't know about cryptozoology yet. You didn't know about these other things that existed out in the wild, and you just happen across this thing. It looks human enough where you're going to look at it and be like, it was a human sort of, but it was also a monster in a way. So, your mind's going to really search for some kind of answer on that. And when you don't have the answers readily available, your mind's going to make up that answer. So it does make me wonder if some of these other places saw these things and they're like, oh, that's a Strigoi, or that's Nosferatu, that's a vampire, this is that, this, that. And I think that happens a lot. I really do. I think with Bigfoot, Dogman, pale crawlers, all these other cultures have seen them, just didn't know what to call them. And so other legends were born from these things.
I think so. And I think I have to be careful there too, because I remember several episodes back, whenever you and I were talking, I said, I bet before the year is out that vampires make a comeback and they'll link it up with the pale crawlers. So I may have just fulfilled my own destiny there.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, that's me. When people run into the pale crawlers, where are they usually running into them at? Is it out in the woods? Is it,
how do we
find them, and how do we avoid them, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, I've taken some reports here from Arizona, actually, where they've been seen in riverbeds, okay? Now, you got to remember, here in Arizona, our riverbeds have a lot of tunnels. They're washways. So they have these tunnels that direct where the water is going, and people have seen them in these tunnels, because they're long, dark tunnels, man. You don't want to go in there and get lost, because you're not going to find your way out. So a lot of people see them in tunnels. People see them out in the woods at night. Some people will see them coming out of, water wells. I have a friend who actually said that he saw 3 of them climbing from a water well in a farmhouse property, that they were just popping out of that water well, just looking around, and they were popping back in. So I think they go into a lot of dark places, and they like to be in the woods. I think that's when they come out, they're hunting. I think they're looking for rabbits or whatever, maybe even humans. I don't know. Maybe they got a taste for human beings. Would support the Wendigo theory, but they're seen in the woods a whole lot.
Do you remember a movie back in the 80s called Chud?
I do. Cannibalistic human underground dwellers. Yes.
Yep. Cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers. That kind of makes me think of that. You and I talk about quite often how reality and movies kind of seem to echo one another back and
Absolutely.
forth. How, you almost kind of wonder, did somebody have some inside information on these things existing, make a movie about it, and then it became more public? Or was it the other way around? Was it they made a movie about this, it got into the subconscious of everyone,
right,
and it caused this to happen in kind of a weird way?
That's a good question. I think it could be a little bit of both. I mean, like Steven Spielberg, he's always been very open about his beliefs of the supernatural and extraterrestrial. That's why he made Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., because he has such a strong belief in these things. Same with George Lucas.
Right. Okay, so what other kinds of things do we have going on with the Wendigo type stuff? We've got, those are up north. We've got I'm trying to see if we're skipping over any links here as far as what fits together.
There is something that a lot of people like to say that pale crawlers are, and I just want to correct them on that. So you'll see stuff on Facebook and YouTube where they'll show a pale crawler, but they don't label it as a pale crawler. They label it as what, Robert?
The rake.
A skinwalker. They say it's a
skinwalker. Yeah, it's either skinwalker or the rake. Yeah.
Right. And, with the rake, I think people stopped looking into the details of that story, because with the rake, it always did something very cruel, something very unusual to the people that it was stalking. Like the first guy said that its hands were really wet, which, how did he know its hands were really wet? Did he touch its hands? And
right.
It was mind speaking to him. And then you hear the other story of the rake that allegedly killed a family, where it was sitting on the bed and was, mentally messing with a little girl by mind speaking to it. Pale crawlers were never known to do that. Okay. There's no cases ever documented where this thing was using mind speak. So I think a lot of people are just saying, oh, well, pale crawlers are the rake because they want the rake to be real, and that's not something that you do. Just because you want something to be real doesn't mean that it is. I mean, it's like Slender Man. You want it to be real. You can't say, oh, it's real and that's fact. You can't do it that way.
Right. So they're saying that it's the skinwalker, which is just ridiculous.
It's absurd. It drives me nuts. I actually had a witness who he called, and he said that he had a skinwalker encounter. And of course, I'm all excited. The hairs on the back of my neck are going woo, 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 because somebody allegedly saw a skinwalker. Well, I get out there to talk to him, and he starts describing this thing, Robert. And at first, I'm beyond excited. I'm like, oh, yeah, here we go. Then he starts telling me, oh, well, it was on all fours. It was bald. It had these black eyes, pale skin. And you could see my shoulders just drop, Robert. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
And I just looked at him. I'm like, are you really, really going to call a pale crawler a skinwalker? And he just looked at me. He's like, well, that's what they call them on YouTube. I felt so defeated, Robert. I was so upset. I'm like, no, they're not the same thing.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I kind of cut my own throat when I do this sometimes, but sometimes the stuff that pops up on YouTube and pops up on TikTok and pops up on Facebook and, and in popular media and everything is so much misinformation that, even what we say, I want people to go back and double check it.
Yes,
for themselves. You don't need Facebook fact checkers. You need you to go back and intelligently look over information, look over several different sources, read, for the love of God, read a damn book. Yes. don't just sit on YouTube and watch some people talk about something and then automatically assume they know everything that they're talking about and then take it as, gospel. Go back and check. I could even make the argument about the gospel. You need to go back and check.
Hey now.
Get all theological in here. Anyway. But yeah, go back and check over stuff. There's people just automatically assume that everybody knows what they're talking about. Well, they've been on YouTube and they've got, 300 episodes or whatever. So they know what they're talking. No, they don't. They probably don't. Nope. Always go back and check. I've told people in the Monstrous group, don't take what I say for absolute, gospel. Go back and double check and read. I may have something wrong too. I'm a human being. I make mistakes.
Right.
I want people to learn. I want people to learn to think on their own.
Right. Well, I mean, you got to look too. Maybe there is kind of like a supernatural attachment to these pale crawlers too. There was a video a long time back. The guy's name escapes me right now, but he filmed what appears to be a pale crawler in his backyard. And he's filming this from his window. I think it's on an iPad that he was filming this on. And as his minister starts speaking the word, this thing's recoiling and going back into the woods. Okay. Now, if this had any connection to the Wendigo, that would actually follow suit because the Wendigo is an evil entity. Okay. It's something that can be repelled with certain beliefs and certain religions. So if this thing was really a pale crawler, maybe in reality, it was a form of the Wendigo because it was recoiling. You could see it going back into the woods.
You made me think of something a while back. I mean, it was several years back, and it keeps popping up. The Glimmer Man film, where it's supposedly a father and daughter that were out in the forest, and they filmed this glimmering entity moving around the forest, hissing at them, and it's supposedly one of those found footage things.
Right.
I don't know if that's ever been proven, disproven. I'm honestly one way or the other.
Right.
I automatically assume hoax. That's what I assume. But if it is, it's a very well done one.
It could be. But what I like to remind everybody, including you, Robert,
yes,
we're not humans living in a supernatural world. We're supernatural entities living in a human world. Okay, we're having our own human experiences. That there are supernatural things in this world that we don't know how to explain just yet. Because we haven't asked the right questions, so we're not getting the right answers just yet. That's why we have to dig deeper, scratch beneath the surface. So could something like the Glimmer Man exist? I mean, why couldn't it? We got Bigfoot, we got Jersey Devil, we got Wendigo. We got so many unknown quantities in our world that it's almost ridiculous that we've lived here so long and we still don't know everything that's in our world. How closed-minded have we become?
Oh, you're right. You're absolutely right. I will agree with you 110% on that one. But what struck me got me so interested in that footage is how much that entity, when you can make out what it looks like, actually looks like one of the pale crawlers.
And maybe it is. Maybe these things can camouflage in some way. I mean, that would tie into the supernatural aspect or even the alien aspect. I know some people thought maybe the pale crawlers were in some way related to the Dover demon. I'm sure you remember that case, Robert, where they saw it on the wall in Dover, Mass, and it was only seen, I think, twice, maybe 3 times at most. Right. And then it simply disappeared. So, I mean, maybe there's some kind of camouflage that they can do if they're a supernatural or alien entity.
Yeah. Or simply something biological that we don't necessarily understand yet.
Right. I mean, there are animals that can camouflage in this world. So we have to look at that too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the octopus very quickly can disappear and you'll never know it was there.
And they're smart as can be, too. Octopus are scary little guys.
Yeah, they are. And did you know that most octopi are actually venomous?
I did not know that.
Yep. You should actually fear octopus because they have 8 legs similar to that other animal that you don't.
Yeah, I know.
The galactic spider.
Oh, man. That thing keeps coming up. That conversation keeps coming up over and over and over again. I think you guys are doing it on purpose.
I haven't been, but I'm going to start.
I think what happened, and I think the audience is going to agree, is I gave you nightmares about Ravenmocker and Skinwalkers and Wendigo. And you were trying to look. You're like, how can I get back at Ryan? Spiders. Yes.
Actually, what it is I had a discussion with a Wendigo and a Skinwalker, and we were trying to come up with something to terrorize you with.
Imagine that. The Wendigo and Skinwalker's like, hey, we don't scare him anymore. We got to figure out what does.
We need something. What have you got, Robert? Well, apparently spiders. Really?
Is that why the Wendigo was laughing at me going, you putz, you're afraid of spiders.
All right. I think we've done a pretty good job on covering over that stuff. What else have you got going on in the future?
Oh, well, I got a lot of podcasts coming up. I don't know what happened, but it seems like every show host on this planet is asking me to be on their podcast right now. So I'll be super, super busy with that. But I am putting the final touches on the Wendigo book, and I'm hoping to have that out by December, because I think it'd be really cool for everybody to sit down and read this really in-depth Wendigo book during winter when the snow is falling and it's cold outside and it gets dark earlier. I think it might add a little bit of a nightmare fuel to their November and December seasons there. So
I agree. I got to get a copy of that as soon as it hits the shelves, so that
you're already on the list, man. I have a certain select few people who are going to get advanced copies that are autographed, and you're on that list.
Fantastic. I'm usually on somebody's list. It's not usually for a book, but it's
you're on a different list now that I found out about the spider thing, but you're on the list. Don't worry.
And we've also we're working together with a couple of more people.
Yes.
Daniel Williams from Cryptid Wrangler, and he's got a friend too. Daryl, what was his name?
Denton. Daryl
Denton. Yes, Daryl Denton. Horrible with names. Great with faces, horrible with names. Daryl Denton, and we're going to get together and we're going to do a podcast called Media of the Minds, and it's going to be twice a month on Mondays, and we'll be you and I will be the scientific side, and they will be more of the woo side of the argument. It was kind of funny whenever we were talking about it. Daniel was kind of like, well, we're the cryptozoological side, and it's like, no, cryptozoology science. we're the science side, you know.
Yep.
So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to go over subjects and talk about how we can meet in the middle as far as trying to build a community, because one of the biggest things that we're running into with building community between all these different subjects, with the paranormal, with cryptozoology, with UFOs and all the other anomalies, is it's like a stone wall that we just can't get past. As far as, honestly, it has to do with bias and being able to interpret and bending in the wind as far as things go. I mean, Ryan and I, we bounce ideas off of each other all the time, and we ensure that we're basing it in science, but we're able to, bend with folklore and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and
tiptoe around it. You need to be able to look at all aspects. And I think that's something most people have forgotten. They think that when they have a theory, they have to stick just to that theory and that's it, because they're right and you're wrong. But that's not the case, though. I mean, nobody's actually right and nobody's wrong. Okay. Until we have specimens to study, until we have all the answers, nobody's right and nobody's wrong. So we can't sit there and have this divide of, oh, well, you're science, so you're no good. You can't have that, because science is ultimately the one that's going to give you the answers you need. And without it, you can't designate a species. So say somebody finds Bigfoot evidence, okay, and he can bring that in, but who's going to verify it for him? Who's going to put it out there that it's an actual species? It's going to be scientists, okay? So you need the scientific aspect. No matter how much you want to believe in the woo, the paranormal, no matter how much you want to believe in that, you're gonna need science. It goes hand in hand. And I know that makes people angry, and I'm sorry it makes you angry. Have a fit. But that's just a cold, hard fact right there. That is the fact.
Yeah. It's not science that has the problem. It's the scientists that have the problem. Science is objective. Humans are subjective. So we ask the wrong questions, and we've been asking, just like you said earlier, we've been asking the wrong questions for a long time.
Right.
We need to work on learning how to ask the right questions.
That's the fun of science, though, is science is there to be proven wrong. You're supposed to ask questions. You're supposed to come up with new hypotheses and new theories and prove what they think is true to be wrong. That way you can go, no, I found information that suggests you're wrong. Here we go. And that's why science is needed.
Exactly. So we're going to have that going on. Of course, I am still working on my animology books, my volume
Nice.
of that. So hopefully, theoretically, I can get the first volume out. I'm hoping by March I should be able
Excellent.
to have it out.
I
That's
want
going
to
to be oh yeah, that's like goes
Sweet.
without saying,
Sweet.
So that's like if I have a copy, you're going to have a copy. So yeah, the first volume will be out in that, and I'm going to do that so that it's structured in
Mhm.
such a way that you'll like if we're covering uh say we're covering evidence, well then that whole volume is about evidence, the collection of evidence, what evidence is, what isn't evidence. Then we'll
Excellent.
move on to the next one, profiling or whatever. That way if we want to add in at the end of like 7 volumes and we want to add in an 8th volume, we're not
Mhm.
trying to, well, I got to rewrite a whole book.
Mhm.
I can just write a new volume and add to it, and
Right.
that'll
Right.
help the people learn how to actually do the research, do the investigation. And I want people to be able to do this in such a way that they can present it almost before a court and say, "Okay, here it is. This is
That
what
would
we've
be
got."
so beneficial. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I
I
am
think
tinkering
that's
with the idea of a third book. I think I might write a third book after the Skinwalker book, where
ooh,
it's indigenous folklore where I'll cover, the Raven Mocker, the Sukalu, all that stuff, and just have it so everybody can read it and they can learn some folklore and some, Native American customs too.
that would be fantastic. You need to do that.
I think I might.
I think you should.
Well, that's
you
a
get,
vote.
you get right on it right now.
Well, there's just so much to cover, though. I mean, we talk about Bigfoot and Dogman all the time. And while they're fascinating topics, you got the Nunahi, the little people from the Cherokee. There's so much to cover. And I think a really expansive book where it just goes in depth and it shows all these different stories and all these different depictions. I think it would be a learning experience for anybody who read it. And I think it would help the community a lot, too.
Oh yeah, I think so too. I think absolutely. I think it's pretty easy for us to find a lot of information over folklore and stuff that's from Europe and even Africa and other areas like that. But for some reason, when we get into the tribal North American indigenous people, it kind of gets swept under the rug, and I don't understand why. Because that's the one that we should really just have tons of information on because we're right here, you know.
Yeah, and
So,
it's a treasured thing too, and I think people fail to realize that when the indigenous are telling their stories, it's actually romantic in a way. Because all these stories were handed down generation to generation to generation to generation. So they're very sacred stories. And I think when you can learn those, you kind of feel special in a way, because if you have a tribal member telling you the same story that his grandfather told him, it's like he's kind of making you part of his family, So I think more people need to have that experience. And I think once they do, like I have, they're going to be absolutely head over heels for it.
Yeah. Yep. I think the next couple of episodes I got coming up, I've got Mr. Jody Cook from the North American Dogman Project. He's agreed he's going to come on and talk with me. After that, I've got Star Fox and Jessica Jones here. They're both going to come on and talk with me.
Oh, my boy Kenny. All right.
Yeah.
Shout out to Kenny Thibodeau.
Yeah, Mr. Kenny. Excellent dude. Excellent. Most excellent.
Yeah, I love Kenny, man. He's a good guy.
He is. He's very, very good guy. And probably going to bring on Todd C. Tate.
I know him.
Yeah. Got a couple of good ones lined up.
Let me make a suggestion to you. You want to hear some really good indigenous stuff? My brother, William Nighthawk.
Oh, love to have him on.
Yeah, I call him Cheatanka because it means big brother. He's a Lakota shaman. He's an elder. And this man knows stuff, Robert, that's going to blow your mind. So if you have a chance to speak to William Nighthawk, do it. Take that chance and do it.
Okay. Sounds great. I will have to do that.
All right.
Well, hang around just a minute. Let me do a closing on the show and we'll chit chat.
All right.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining in on another episode of Monstrous the Podcast. Remember, lock your doors, lock your windows, check in the closet, check under the bed. Because monsters are real and you never know when they're coming back.
In the shadows they hide, eyes that pierce through the night. Whispers turn into cries, fear grips tight with no fight. Claws scrape the midnight air,